So now you're a guy who believed in the U.S. intelligence services. You were the son of two career government servants. When you discover this broad surveillance, what impact does it have on you emotionally?
It was an astonishing sense of violation. Because think about it, people look at me now and they think I'm this crazy guy, I'm this extremist, whatever. Some people have a misconception and think I set out to burn down the NSA. But that's not what this was about. In many ways, 2013 wasn't about surveillance at all. What it was about was a violation of the Constitution. What it was about was democracy and government. I had signed up to help my country. My very first day entering into duty for the CIA, I was required to pledge an oath of service. Now, a lot of people are confused. They think there's an oath of secrecy, but this is important to understand. There's a secrecy agreement. This is a civil agreement with the government, a non-disclosure agreement called Standard Form 312, very exciting, that says you won't talk to journalists, you won't write books, as I have now done. But when you give this oath of service, it's something very different. It's a pledge of allegiance not to the agency, not to a government, not to a president, but to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so when I realize we have been violating in secret the Fourth Amendment of that Constitution for the better part of a decade, and the rate of violation is increasing, the scope of the violation is increasing with every day, we are committing felonies in the United States under a direct mandate from the White House, billions of times a day. Honestly, I fell into depression. And this leads to a period where I resign from what would be considered direct mission related work out in Japan in the foreign field, as we call it, and I return to a purely corporate position for Dell as a sales official at CIA headquarters.
Before you actually go through the revelations of this material, you describe going to NSA's headquarters, and you see analysts using a tool that allows them to exploit the fruits of all this mass surveillance. It's a tool called X-Keyscore. What did it allow these guys to do?
Okay, so
allow you to do.
So when you think about all of these intelligence programs you've heard of, right? They've got your email, they've got your internet communications, they've got your phone calls, but for everybody, everywhere. Obviously, this isn't just a straight stream. People aren't reading it as it comes in because it would take more hours in the day than any government has people to go through. So what they actually do is they just dump this into gigantic data centers like they've built in Bluffdale, Utah, and other smaller covert ones around the world. So they don't have to move the data around. So they construct what's called a distributed query system. You can think of this like Google for spies. And what it does is anywhere in the world that we've collected information, everywhere we're intercepting communications now, we have our own little search engine. It's a Google box, that little prompt that you can access from your desk wherever you are, just in an NSA internal website. And you can type in anybody's phone number, anybody's email address, any computer's internet address. And then anywhere on the internet that one of our sensors has collected a communication, it will look through instantly everything that it has, and then it will send just the results back to that employee. So you can spy on anyone in the world from anywhere in the world, as long as you have access to this network and this tool.
So if you have the clearance, you pick a name, you get their phone calls, their web searches, what?
So I'm working with the internet side of it. We have people who work with telephony data, which is largely phone calls and SMSs, but your internet data, it is everything largely that transit the global communication network. If you send it over a satellite hop, we have what are called foreign satellite sites all over the world that are just listening to the sky. If you are sending it to a cell phone tower, well, we hack those all over the world to the best of our ability. If you send it over a landline, right, your fiber optic cable at your home, and that goes to your internet service provider, well, your internet service provider probably cooperates with the NSA through the FBI. And this is being replicated again and again and again throughout the country and across the world. It's not everywhere, but it's as close to everywhere as we can get. And this means it's basically every communication that can be intercepted, that can be stored, that can be processed, that can be decrypted, we can search and we can read.
You sat at one of these terminals and had access to this, and you describe looking at the material of a professor in Indonesia, right?
Yeah, so this is an academic. He is just some kind of engineer. I believe he's applying for either a position or a period of study at a university in Iran. And the U.S. government, for whatever reason, has an interest in this particular university. We don't spy on every university, but we spy on, interestingly, a lot of them, which would surprise people. But it is Iran, so people go, okay, maybe there's some intelligence value. Maybe this guy's a terrorist. And what struck me here was that normally when we do a deep dive and we look into someone, it's because they're up to no good. It's because they're associated with terrorism. This gentleman, in fact, was not. He's applying to a university, but he's caught up in the dragnet. And so they have his university admissions application. They have pictures of his passport. And then I see something unusual, something that I don't normally see. I see a video file. Now, we can intercept video files just like we do with everything else. But this one, to me, indicated that it was produced because we had hacked his machine and we had turned his webcam on while he was at the machine. And we do this sometimes to confirm, particularly infrastructure analysts, who at this anonymous machine is actually using it. To find
so he's on his laptop, right?
Yes, he's on his laptop, and we're looking at the man behind the device. And in his lap is a little boy, a toddler, who's just playing on the keyboard, and the father's smiling. And the little boy looks at the webcam. It's just a glimpse, but to me it seems as though he's looking at me. And it reminds me of my childhood, of learning about technology with my own father. And I realize this man has done nothing wrong. He's just trying to get a job. He's just trying to study. He's just trying to get through life like all of us are. And yet he's caught up. His children are caught up. We are all caught up by a system that we were not allowed to know existed. We were not allowed to vote on whether this was proper or improper, and courts were not allowed to assess, open courts, real courts, whether it was proper and constitutional. Where do we go from there?
So I want to talk about your decision to release these access to many documents to 3 journalists, and just talk about why you took the course you did and why some critics say you had other options. One thing people say is, look, there's a system. There are inspector general's offices of each of these agencies. Why couldn't you go to them?
Well, this is a great question. For one, we've never seen the Inspector General's office actually be an effective safeguard for the Constitution itself. We have had, since I came forward, one of the Inspector General employees, I believe the Deputy Inspector General for the NSA, come forward and said, if Snowden had come to me, I would have explained to him his misconceptions about how these programs worked, how these things are in fact legal, how these things are in fact constitutional, and maybe he wouldn't have had to do this at all. The Inspector General is a great resource to have if someone is a middle manager and they're engaged in sexual harassment, or they are embezzling, or something of that nature. But if you have a criminal conspiracy inside not just the leadership of the NSA, but in fact in the White House, that is run by the vice president's own lawyer in the Bush administration. Dick Cheney had a lawyer named David Addington who said building this mass surveillance system in the very first instance was legal, when in fact he knew that was not the case. What do you do? This is asking you, the hens, to sort of report the fox's misbehavior to the fox himself. And I want to point out just real quickly that it's not a contention that these programs were illegal, that these programs were likely unconstitutional. That's not my assertion. That is the assertion of the very first federal court, I think a ruling of Judge Leon, in the wake of these disclosures. Prior to the revelations of mass surveillance in 2013, the government, A, said these things weren't happening, B, if they were happening, they were legal, and C, why are you even asking about this in the first place?
The description in the book of how you worked through how you were going to release this material and how you contacted the journalist and provided it is really fascinating. We won't have time to go into it here, but I want to talk to you about some of the specific arrangements you made. Three journalists were provided with access to thousands of documents that you had. What conditions did you impose on their use? What did you tell the journalists about what they could do and not do?
When we looked at what happened, what produced this, the system of checks and balances failed. And so if I had come forward myself and said, look, this is wrong, this is a violation of the Constitution, I'm the president of secrets, and I'm going to decide what the public needs to know, and I just throw it out on the internet, which wouldn't be hard for me. I'm a technologist. I could have done this in an afternoon. There's a risk implied in that. What if I was wrong? What if I didn't understand these things? What if it was, in fact, legal or constitutional, or these programs were effective rather than, as I believed, ineffective, which later was confirmed by the Obama administration. These programs weren't saving lives. They had some intelligence value, but they didn't have a public safety value. At least that was meaningful. So what I did was I tried to reconstruct the system of checks and balances by using myself to provide documents to the journalists, but never to publish them myself. People don't realize this, but I never made public a single document. I trusted that role to the journalists to decide what the public did and did not need to know. Before the journalists published these stories, they had to go to the government, and this was a condition that I required them to do, and tell the government, warn them they're about to run this story about this program, and the government could argue against publication, say, you've got it wrong, or you've got it right, but if you publish this, it's going to hurt somebody. In every case I'm aware of, that process was followed, and that's why in 2019 we've never seen any evidence at all presented by the government that someone's been harmed as a result of these stories. That's why I believe these stories won the Pulitzer Prize for public service. It's because there is a way that you can maximize the public benefit of a free press and them aggressively contesting the government's monopoly on information, at the same time mitigating the risks of even a very large disclosure of documents by simply making sure that you trust the right people, the right sector of society, with the right system to keep everyone honest, because all of us work better together than we do alone.
You know, I will say that on that question of whether this has put harmed American interests or put people in danger, there was an AP story last year which quoted a spokesman for the National Counterintelligence and Security Center as saying Snowden's disclosed documents have put U.S. personnel or facilities at risk around the world and damaged intelligence collection efforts, exposed to tools used to amass intelligence, etc. Are they wrong?
They are wrong. Look, I can't correct 6 years of lies in 60 seconds. But when you look at all of those claims, they're always merely allegations. The government has never put forward any evidence, and they have investigated me for 6 years. So has basically every other government on the planet. And you, a journalist, know better than anyone else that the government aggressively leaks when it's in its favor. You can look at this White House right now. If if disclosures of classified information, just hard stop, caused damage, if they created risks for U.S. personnel or programs, 3/4 of the White House would be in prison right now. They're not, because the vast majority of leaks, while they are uncomfortable, while they are embarrassing, or sometimes beneficial to government, far more is classified than actually needs to be. So yes, the government has made those allegations, and they will continue to make those allegations. But look, the thing that we always have to ask is, what is the evidence to back that assertion? And they've never provided that, and I'm quite confident they never will, because it didn't happen.
You fully expected to be identified. You eventually identified yourself to explain your motives. As you were planning this, what kind of future did you envision for yourself?
The likeliest outcome for me, hands down, was that I'd spend the rest of my life in an orange jumpsuit. But
in prison?
Yes, but that was a risk that I had to take.
So now you're You've been in Moscow for 6 years. Lindsay Mills has joined you. You are now married. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment. What kind of security precautions do you take? You didn't want to go to a studio for this interview, right? You're pretty careful, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I run my own studio because, people ask how I make my living, and I give lectures. I speak publicly for the American Program Bureau, and places book me to speak about the future of cybersecurity, what's happening with surveillance, and about conscience and whistleblowing. But I do, I've never been the nightclub type. I'm a little bit of an indoor cat. Whether I lived in Maryland or New York or Geneva or Tokyo or Moscow, I'll always spend the majority of my time looking into a screen. So yeah, while I'm out on the street, I try not to be recognized. I also live a much more open life now than I did back in 2013, because it seems the consensus has resolved that anyone who tries to kill me is only going to prove my point.
Do people ask you for selfies?
Usually I get that when I'm identified because I'm meeting journalists at a hotel or something. Out on the street, almost no one recognizes me, which to a privacy advocate is just the most wonderful gift that you can get. I do get noticed sometimes, like when I go in computer stores or if I went in a museum once. Germans seem especially good at identifying me. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was how I was covered in the media. But they ask for selfies, and of course I'm happy to provide them.
I mean, you say in the book that you try to go out with a hat on, you might change your beard. Why do you not want to be recognized? What do you fear?
Well, think about it. I mean, you work in media. You're a journalist. You make your living from talking not just publicly, but talking to people who have interesting things to say. And yet you don't put your address, I think, on your website so fans can just show up at the door. We all have a desire for a certain level of privacy. I think I have risks that are higher than the average person. But even if I didn't, I would rather be able to selectively share information with people about where I live, how I spend my time, and honestly, who I am.
Fair enough. I guess I'm just wondering,
person,
do you think someone might try and kidnap you and extradite you to the United States, or that,
Well, if that's been the plan, they've done a really poor job at it, since 6 years later I'm still free. I would like to think, on the part of my government, that they're not that far gone, and they're not actually looking to disappear whistleblowers. Or perhaps it's just simply because it's too difficult when I'm on the other side of the world, and in no less than Russia. But I don't worry as much as I did. Maybe it's fatigue. But yeah, there was a period where I didn't want to go out without shaving. There was a time when I didn't want to go out without putting a scarf and a hat on. But those days for me are long gone. The book ends back in that period, and the beautiful thing about life and about, I guess, the story that I've been fortunate to live is that even when things get as bad as they possibly can, even when you see all of the ways that the system can fail, time and people always have the chance to make it better.
As somebody who knows a lot about the kind of information that can be gleaned from a cell phone, I'm wondering what precautions you take with your own cell phone use?
Well, first off, I try not to use one as much as possible. And when I do use one, I use a cell phone that I've myself modified. I perform a kind of surgery on it. I open it up with special tools, and I use a soldering iron to remove the microphone, and I disconnect the camera. So that the phone can't simply listen to me when it's sitting there. It physically has no microphone in it. And when I need to make a call, I just connect an external microphone through the headphone jack, right? And this way the phone works for you rather than you working for the phone. You need to be careful about the software you put on your phone. You need to be careful about the connections it's making, because today, most people, they've got 1,000 apps on their phone. And it's sitting there on your desk right now or in your hand, and the screen can be off. But it's connecting, hundreds or thousands of times a second. If some of your audience is listening to this on podcasts right now, through, for example, earbuds, they know their screen can be turned off. It can be sitting, writing in their pocket along with them. They don't even have to be looking at the phone. But it's still very much active. And this is this core problem of the data issue that we're dealing with today. We're passing laws that are trying to regulate the use of data. We're trying to regulate the protection of data. But all of these things presume that the data has already been collected. What we need to be doing is we need to be regulating the collection of data, because our phones, our devices, our laptops, even just driving down the street with all of these systems that surround us today, is producing records about our lives. It's the modern pollution. It is invisible, but it still harms us. But it doesn't harm us for some years.
Let me ask you one other question. You've lived in Russia for 6 years now. Do you see yourself making a life there, or do you hope to come home someday?
My ultimate goal will always be to return to the United States. And I've actually had conversations with the government, last in the Obama administration, about what that would look like. And they said, you should come and face trial. And I said, sure, sign me up. Under one condition. I have to be able to tell the jury why I did what I did. And the jury has to decide, was this justified or unjustified? This is called a public interest defense and is allowed under pretty much every crime someone can be charged for. Even murder, for example, has defenses. It can be self-defense and so on and so forth. It could be manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. But in the case of telling a journalist the truth about how the government was breaking the law, the government says there can be no defense, there can be no justification for why you did it. The only thing the jury gets to consider is, did you tell a journalist something you were not allowed to tell them? If yes, it doesn't matter why you did it. You go to jail. And I have said, as soon as you guys say, for whistleblowers, it is the jury who decides if it was right or wrong to expose the government's own law breaking. I'll be in court the next day. Unfortunately, the Attorney General at the time sent back a letter saying, that sounds great, but all we can do for you right now is we will promise not to torture you. So I'd say negotiations are still ongoing.
Although you haven't actually negotiated since the Obama administration, right?
Right. We're waiting for their call, but the ball is very much in the government's court.
Edward Snowden, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Edward Snowden spoke to Fresh Air's Dave Davies from his apartment in Moscow. Snowden's new memoir is called Permanent Record. Their interview was recorded Tuesday morning. Soon after, the news broke that the U.S. Justice Department filed suit to recover all proceeds from Snowden's book, alleging that he violated non-disclosure agreements by not letting the government review the manuscript before publication. Snowden's attorney, Ben Wisner, said in a statement that the book contains no government secrets that have not previously been published by respected news organizations, and that the government's pre-publication review system is under court challenge. If you'd like to catch up on Fresh Air interviews you missed, like our interviews this week with New York Times reporters Robin Pogrebin and Kate Kelly about their book The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, or Andrea Mitchell of NBC News and MSNBC, who's about to receive an Emmy for Lifetime Achievement, check out our podcast. You'll find lots of Fresh Air interviews.